students, today I am going to take a class on the characteristics of the Victorian period. In my previous class, I have talked about the characteristics of the Romantic Age, and after the Romantic Age, Victorian Age or Victorian period started. Victorian period started in 1837 and it continued up to 1901. And Victorian period was named after the name of Queen Victoria. There are some ages in the history of English literature which are actually named after the name of some famous person or personality. Suppose Elizabethan period, which is considered to be the glorious or the golden period in the history of English literature, is named or was named after the name of Queen Elizabeth I. And if we come to the Jacobean period is, was named after the name of King James I. James I had another Latin name which was Jacobus, and after the name of Jacobus, Jacobean period started. And Caroline period was named after the name of Charles I. Charles I had another name which was Carolus, and after the name of Carolus, Caroline period was named. And after that, this Victorian period, which was actually named after the name of Queen Victoria. Now come to the characteristics of this period. The remarkable characteristics of this period should have to be understood by the students to get the ideas about the compositions of the writings of the Victorian period. The first one, that is very much important one, is the conflict between faith and doubt. The conflict between faith and doubt. This is one important characteristic of the Victorian period is that there was the conflict between faith and doubt. Faith was challenged by the doubt, and one remarkable event was there during the Victorian period. Charles Darwin had published a book named The Origin of Species, and for the publication of The Origin of Species and some other regions, there was the conflict between faith and doubt, which had shaken the whole society and influenced the Victorian literature. The second one is Victorian Compromise. And this is a very remarkable event of the Victorian period. That is, there was the compromise between science and religion. And before this compromise, there was the conflict between science and religion. And because of this conflict, science could not flourish well, and the religion was suppressing. In the name of religion, actually, people attempted to suppress science, and for this Victorian compromise, science could flourish. And so the Victorian compromise, is very much important event during this Victorian period. And the next one is the impact of colonialism. During the Victorian period, colonialism was, a very much powerful factor. The British imperialism could conquer many countries, many colonies during that time, and therefore there was the impact of colonialism. Colonialism and anti-colonialism constituted the subject matter of literature during this period also. The fourth one is actually the representative type of writing, representative type of composition. Victorian writers tried attempted to compose their writings with the focus of the society. They attempted to represent their society, and that is why there was the representative type of writings during this Victorian period. And that is why, Alfred Tennyson is considered to be a representative writer because of his representative type of writings. Literature of protest. Another important thing of the Victorian period is there was the literature of the protest. Literature was published to protest against the corruption, against the anarchy prevalent in the society. So there was the literature of the protest. And dominance of novel writing. Dominance of novel. This is another important factor which had happened only for the first time during the Victorian period. Before this period, during the neoclassical period, there was novel writing. Novel was innovated during the neoclassical period, but novel was not in a very powerful position in comparison to poetry. Even during the Romantic period, there were some novelists, remarkable novelists like Walter Scott, like Jane Austen, like Mary Shelley, but they could not come out so powerful in comparison to the poets during this period. But during the Victorian period, the novel writings had been in a very powerful position for the first time in the history of English literature. There was Charles Dickens, there was Robert Louis Stevenson, there was Thomas Hardy, and all these novelists were in a very powerful position during this time for the first time. And appearance of the women novelists. This is also another remarkable feature of the Victorian period, that during this period a large number of women writers came to the scene, and they had a very powerful influence on literature during this time, such as Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, Anne Bronte, Elizabeth Gaskell, and George Eliot, Virginia Woolf. All these female writers had a very influential position during this Victorian period. The next one is dramatic monologue. So dramatic monologue is a kind of poetry in which there is only one speaker who will speak to the silent listener or the listeners. And this type of dramatic monologue was innovated or invented for the first time during this Victorian period. The next one, influence of painting movement. Influence of painting movement. Painting movement had also influenced the writers of the Victorian period, and there were the pre-Raphaelitic poets who were deeply influenced by the literary movement of Italy, and that had also influenced a lot on the literature of the Victorian period. The next one is the growth of materialism. The growth of materialism. The growth of materialism had also a very significant role in the literature of the Victorian society or the Victorian period. And that materialism was so powerful in a position because of scientific achievement. And we should remember that there was the Victorian compromise. And because of this Victorian compromise, scientific achievements were very much, frequent during this time. And because of these scientific achievements, there was actually the growth of materialism, and that had the significant influence in the literature of the Victorian society. Then, influence of legends, influence of mythology. So, in the Victorian literature, we find that there was the influence of mythology, and the writers of the Victorian period had the myth-making ability to produce some sort of literature with, the mingling of mythology and reality. Another important thing is Victorian spirit. Victorian spirit is another important factor of the Victorian literature. Victorian spirit means the Renaissance spirit. To have the tendency to see the unseen, to know the unknown, to hear the unheard, and that was the spirit of the Victorian people, and that Victorian spirit had been, reflected in Victorian literature. Another important thing is intellectual movement. Intellectual movement is another factor of the Victorian literature. The writers came out in a very powerful position to reflect their writings with intellectualism. And that intellectual movement had also influenced the whole society, whole literature during this period actually. And the last one is class conflict or class distinction. And it is believed that during the Victorian period, actually there was the emergence of the middle class society, and the lower class and the upper class were always prevalent in English society. But during the Victorian period, there was another society which was known as middle class society. So we have got three sort of societies in Victorian period. One is the lower class of society, and another was middle class, and the topmost was the upper class society. And there was the conflict between these society, between these classes, and that would also constitute the subject matter of literature here. And if the students could remember these 15 characteristics, and then I think it will be easier for the students to understand the literature of the Victorian society. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for your patient hearing.